I'm making so many hand gestures right now, painting like this, and the volcanoes over here, and then you've got like the giants over here, and you want to create space, and I'm like, nobody can see what I'm doing here.
This is Chill Bill coming at you live from K-Troll, here to introduce another exciting episode of Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast discussing anything and everything Skylanders. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I am your co host, Trioxen, and here today again with my other co host, GFDitto. And today is a special occasion because we're also guest starring returning favorite, Inklander, who will also be replacing me, as this is my last episode. And saving the best for last, we have with us David Rodriguez, who is a creative director at Blizzard and worked on the story for Skylanders Swap Force, Skylanders Superchargers, as well as an uncredited role writing the story for the 3DS games, as well as the Skylanders comics. So welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I am happy to be here continuing this on.
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm really excited to talk about Skylanders with you all.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me back. And I'm happy to do this whole passing the torch thing. And I'm excited to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Skylanders Swap Force.
Oh man, I'm so old.
Yeah, it's really hard to believe it's been 10 years since Swap Force came out.
It really is. I still remember being in Times Square when the game launched. And that was incredible to get to see that. And it feels like it was not that long ago, but there's been a lot of games between Swap Force and now. So yeah, I guess it's been 10 years.
So David, how did you get started in the video game industry?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you the story, and I hope it is interesting because it doesn't make a lot of linear sense. But let's give it a shot. So I have been in the video game industry for my 23rd anniversary just passed. So 23 years ago, I was recently graduated from college. I want to say like a year and a half or so. And my girlfriend, who is now my wife, her brother was an animator at a studio in Chicago called High Voltage Software. And they told me that they were looking for an associate designer. And at the time, I didn't even know like jobs like that existed, right? And I went to school, like I have a BFA in musical theater. So my college experience was in writing and directing shows and singing and dancing. Most of the singing and dancing was because I didn't want to take like three sciences. And so if you like got a BFA instead, you added like 20 credits in performance, and then you got to skip some of like I didn't have to take anatomy, physiology, or stats because I would have failed that horribly. So that was my background. And then when I graduated, and I was still trying to figure out what it was I was going to do, and they told me that, like I said, the associate design position was open. So I put together my resume, put together some writing samples. They had an online test that I could take. And so I wrote like a pitch for that. And I turned that in. And then I just went back to, I was a substitute drama teacher at an elementary school is what I was doing in the meantime. And then a few months later, they called me in for an interview, and they really liked my samples and they liked the stuff that I had written. And they hired me shortly thereafter to be a associate game designer on a game called Ground Control Dark Conspiracy, which was the expansion pack sequel to Ground Control, which is a PC game. And so I was the writer on the game. Like I wrote the cinematics and I wrote like all the missions and all that sort of thing. And I learned how to lay out missions and use the tool. And that was my start in the industry. And from there, I moved on to becoming like the lead designer and writer for Hunter the Reckoning, based on the White Wolf RPG. We did like the survival horror 4-player game for that. And I was with that studio for about 8 years. And then I had some friends who were working at Vicarious Visions, and they said they were looking for design positions around Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2. And so I applied for the position here, now 15 years ago, and was hired not as a writer, but as a senior designer, like to provide leadership and to help do some like mission layout and some stuff like that. Ultimate Alliance, I mostly did like all the hubs. So like if you go into a headquarters level in Ultimate Alliance 2, that's me. I'd set up all that stuff. But I didn't write on the game. And I worked on some Transformers DS games, but I actually didn't start writing there until like 2 or 3 years in, where while I was working on Guitar Hero, we were doing Transformers War for Cybertron, and we were doing like the DS games, and they needed scripts for that game, and they sort of tapped me to start working on that, and they enjoyed my process so much, I guess, and like my work that I ended up writing for pretty much all of our games moving forward. And so that's kind of how I got my start. And it's always weird when I have to tell like, younger devs or people who are aspiring devs that my path to this started in musical theater, but that's the truth. That's how I got here. And a lot of those skills that I learned in writing and directing and collaborating and pulling people together to like hold a vision and execute on that vision, and the date of a show doesn't move, just like your ship date, and like learn how to communicate with artistic people and people who are passionate and getting them to all work together was like a huge win that I had spent my time learning how to do that in theater and learning how to put up my own shows and write my own plays. That really translated surprisingly into the work I do now outside of the video game part. But I was very surprised that I could apply so much of what I learned from my degree, and you see that it comes through in some of the work that I've done on the Skylander games.
So I feel like I need to just make as many musical references during this episode as I possibly can then.
So many musical references.
What were some of the challenges that came with writing for an IP that had originally started development at another studio entirely?
So when VV started working on Swap Force, Giants was in mid development. So Skylanders Giants was in mid development. So they had done 2 stories. And so in my experience in games and even at working at VV, we were very accustomed to working with established properties already. So like Marvel Ultimate Alliance and Transformers, even Hunter the Reckoning was an RPG, pen and paper RPG game that we were adapting. And so a lot of the process was the same with that. It was meeting the other team. Like we flew out to the Toys for Bob studio, met Paul Ritchie and like the team there. They walked us through like what was going to happen in Giants, what the new toys were going to be. We got to see prototypes of all sorts of things and sort of learn what their vision was for the property as a whole, because only one game had come out. And so we sort of figured out what the IP was, what the sort of tentpole stakes were for like these are the pillars that hold up what it means to be a Skylanders game, be a Skylanders story, and sort of figure out where are the boundaries that we are playing in to tell our story. And so the challenge is you are working on something that is already been established. There's a lot of people who have opinions and a lot of stakeholders on the game, and because there's also pressure because Skylanders was such a hit, right? And so like you don't want to be the people who mess that up, right? Like you don't want to be the people who ruin Skylanders. And so there's that kind of pressure as well. And so a lot of it is just learning how to collaborate across the country, different time zones, and just learning the language of the game. And so that was really the challenge. And then because the game was still so new, a lot of the rules and lore were still being developed at that time. And so we were still working that out together as we were working on the franchise.
That's really cool to hear, because we had been told in the past that like the two studios had worked really closely together in collaboration on this. And to hear it from the perspective of the other studio is really neat.
Like our production team from Activision was the same team. And so they helped, sort of streamline that, sort of keep having that one group overseeing even just both projects, kept some continuity between them and made sure that we were informed so that we weren't making like big errors or things that contradicted something in the other projects.
I guess you could say there was a lot of surface pressure there in Kanto. Okay, maybe the puns and references won't work. Okay.
Okay. Encanto was great.
So, speaking of surface pressure, Swap Force has a volcano.
It does. It does have a volcano.
So, where did the idea for Mount Cloudbreak come from? And did the elementals ever factor more into the story surrounding the volcano?
Mount Cloudbreak, well, the idea is sort of tied into a bunch of different things. And the idea of like a lost world was essentially what Swap Force was about. The way the giants were folded into the story was they had been around a long time ago and then they had disappeared, right? So there's a lot of old stories about like worlds hidden within worlds. And, I think there's like another like old comic book story about like flying through. There was like a hole in the Arctic, and through that hole there's like a fantasy world like hidden below. And so it's like an ancient fantasy trope of like there's a seemingly natural occurrence in the world, and if you can go through that occurrence, it's hiding something like big and vast and magical behind it. So that's really what the idea was for Mount Cloudbreak. Like there's this volcano that is not something that you would fly into or around normally, and because of how it was set up, it was concealing this entrance into that part of the world. And so that was really where the concept came from. And it also gave us like a reason why you had this whole section of like dozens of characters and other things happening in the world that were not touched on in the first two games. So it created a sense of separation between the two spaces. And so, yeah, kind of just inspired by those classic stories like John Carter from Mars or the Warlord from DC Comics and that sort of thing. Even Chronicles of Narnia a little bit, right? Like just a magical world behind something mundane. Not that volcanoes that mundane, but you get it, right? And the elementals, we wanted to create just sort of these epic creatures that existed in the world to kind of like become like part of the visual language of the level and sort of inspire that. I don't remember if they were ever tied more into the story, but I'm sure we wrote a bunch of lore about it. I have to go back and check. So I don't remember 100% if they ever participated more in the story or not, or if they were just kind of like these legends.
Was there like any other specific reason for kind of doing the world within a world idea, or was it just sort of a rule of cool where it's just like this is just a really cool idea to dive into and we want to explore this?
I think we had other ideas, and this was the one that made the team excited and that created that space, right? Because Giants was still in development. And even though they had their story laid out, you want to make sure that while you have these two games of development, that you have enough room between them for both stories to take up as much real estate as they want to do without infringing on each other. But they were too far along for us to do much. Like we couldn't really like try to directly link them together, like a hard link, because of where we were in stages of development. And so it was both a cool concept and also it gave us that barrier, right? Where we could have a space that was a clearly defined sandbox for us to play in that existed in the universe and had ties to the universe, but allowed us some latitude to play without breaking anything that they were doing at Giants.
How difficult was it to come up with a story that would go to introduce the swapping mechanic?
So games work differently than a lot of forms of storytelling and narrative. Like sometimes the story leads the game, but in the case of Skylanders, because of the toys, a lot of the times the game leads the story. The game and the mechanics need to drive the story. And so the mechanics for what we were going to do happened before we had a story. We knew we were going to do like we were talking through a lot of ideas for what the toys could be, and like swappable became the thing. And so it's like, okay, we need a story for this. And I believe that is also one of the reasons that the Cloud Break thing was so well received, because you had this whole thing where like it's a magical volcano that goes off every 100 years, and those Skylanders that got caught in that magical eruption at that time allowed them to come away from it with this ability. In the classic comic book stories of explosion of mystical energy allowing like powers to be granted and weird things to happen and that sort of thing. And so that allowed us to sort of tie those things together in a way that made sense within the world, right? Like, okay, it's a magical volcano, it does this thing, and because they were trapped in it and caught, that allowed them to now have this ability to swap between themselves. And so that's one of, like I said, that's why the Mount Cloudbreak just sort of just worked for us. So I don't know if it was hard, but it's just kind of part of the job is sometimes you are given a mechanic or a part of a game or a section of gameplay, and the job is to like, okay, can you contextualize this so it fits within the game, within the world, and you give it a narrative so that there's an emotional connection and that sort of thing. And a lot, we can usually make that work, and we can make that seamless so that it all feels natural, whether it's starting from the narrative or starting from the mechanic. No matter what, the narrative needs to serve the game because the game first. And I felt like that part went pretty well for us. I don't remember it being super difficult.
You're saying it wasn't super difficult, it was just part of the job. But
Right.
back when you were starting out in your career in the video game industry, did you find it difficult to adapt to that?
Yes, that was like, I didn't understand at first because obviously I hadn't done games before, right? And so in my head, you write it like all my training was in plays or comic book writing, right? And so that's very linear storytelling. If you've played with that dungeon master or game master who everything you try to do to take some agency in the story, you are railed right back onto whatever plot they had, no matter what. And you start to feel like, am I playing this game or am I just sort of dancing in their story? You never want the player to feel that. Like there are rails because we can't have infinite choices in there, but you don't want the rails to just be aggressive or feel like the player isn't enjoying it in a lot of the games that I make. And so I had to go through a learning process and working on even my very first game because it was an RTS of like how much story is okay, how much dialogue, and making it fit within the space or explaining why we have this mechanic or this vehicle. And so trying to contextualize as a skill was something I had to develop kind of on the fly. And even in doing design documents, I was doing them so wrong. Like I was just writing them like a story, and programmers were like, "You wrote millions of dollars of work into this document. Like all of this sort of interactive events within the story, and you're just writing features." And so it took me a while to sort of just learn how all of that stuff worked. And I would say that there was a good 2 to 3 year learning curve before I felt like I had that a good, clear understanding of the role that narrative should play in a game.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Just a whole other world of writing. It's yeah.
One of the things that I say a lot at work is that explaining is not storytelling. Explaining is just the boring part of the story. And if you can make people care about what is happening in the story, if you can make them care about the characters and the context and the narrative reasoning that you're giving doesn't break that immersion, then then that is way stronger than having like ironclad explanation in canon and that sort of thing. Because like when you're passing things around or if you're dealing with like shared universes between other creators, there's going to be some bumps in there. And so I always push for like, okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time on explaining because we're here to create drama, we're here to create conflict, and we're here to create emotional resonance with these characters in a world that makes sense. But what we don't want to do is spend pages and pages of content on explaining how a thing works unless that is super important to the story. Like you can put that stuff in like a lore document or the people that are interested in that sort of thing, but that's not what I want to have my characters stand around like sort of explaining the story to everybody. And so we talk about how that works and understanding the rules of sort of like how do we get you immersed in that so that when you hear magical volcano, you're like, yeah, I'm in. Let's go. Tell me more about the magical volcano that turned people into swappable superheroes. Let's talk about that.
So you talked a little bit about wanting to create this magical world that is separate from the rest of the Skylands that we knew from Spyro's Adventure and Giants. But what prompted the idea to do multiple levels within the same region? Like we have multiple desert themed stages in this, for example.
At the time, we had this really great concept team and we worked closely together. And what we did at the beginning was try to understand how this world was set up. And so that is the part that I love world building. And so that's like the reverse of what I just said, sort of about explaining. Like, this is when we do all the explaining so that everybody who is making the game understands what it is that we are making, understands the rules of it, so that when no matter what we're making in the game, it's always informed. We produced two, like, sort of art books that were sort of internally shared that snuck out into the world. But there was one called Strata, which sort of walked through the concepting and the building of Thought Force. And Strata is called that because when we were designing how the volcano worked and the world worked, we sort of divided because it's all floating islands, right? And we're trying to visualize, okay, how does that work and how are they related and how do we create environments and like which section of the game is which and how are we informing that as to like how it fits within the realm of the volcano-ish world. And so the strata was essentially just like layers like a cake. And as you went through them toward the core of like the Cloudbreak Isle or whatever we were calling that, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but essentially each strata was a layer, and each layer had its own personality or ecosystem. And so you had the desert strata, you had the watery one, the icy one, and you had the foresty one, right? And so that's how we divided it. And then having the way it just sort of broke down like the number of levels they were that was sort of requested to fill the space for the entire game. It just sort of broke down into an even like, oh, we'll just do kind of 3 in each section and create like a deeper path to make it feel like you are progressing deeper into the Cloudbreak Islands the further you go through the game. And that was sort of the idea. And I think we talk about it more eloquently in the book, but that was the idea. The concept team specifically wanted to understand the ecosystem of the Cloudbreak Islands. And then that's kind of where those elementals came in. Like those were the anchor creatures for each strata that they belonged to and sort of contained the personification of that zone.
Gives me like a whole newfound appreciation of the level select. Now that you describe that, I can totally picture that.
Yeah, the UI team even was like, oh, this is what the world is. This is how we'll design the level select.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I guess that's one of those things that I personally never picked up on. But yeah, I can easily see that now.
What was your favorite sections?
I always really love snow and ice levels, and Swap Force just really knocked it out of the park for me. I really
Yes.
love all of them.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yes. And Avril is one of my favorite NPCs that we got to do. And she is played by Elle Newlands, voice actress, who is awesome. And I still remember her recording session and all these other things and like the whole sort of Scottish ice warrior theme that the characters all had back there and her being in charge and that sort of thing. Originally, so like she shows up, right? And you're being attacked or whatever, and she shows up and she like beats them up with a fish.
Yes.
Yep.
So this was one of the places where we were like, okay, you had the tone wrong. Like NPCs don't jump in a lot to physically help Skylanders. And so we wanted Avril, though, as the captain of the guard to have a little bit of combat skill. And so she showed up, and in the original story, I think she was armed. And so she was like beating them up. And they're like, that's not quite the tone. And so we spent some time on it, and they're like, well, can she beat him up with a fish? And I'm like, yeah, we can make that cool. And she even has her line about serving fish. And in the booth, I remember Elle Newlands talking about how Scottish do you want me to say fish? And so we were like, oh yeah, all the way. And so it comes out like fash, like when she does it. And so she did such a great job with that character. And so yes, the Frostfest Mountains are one of my favorites too.
For me, my favorite area was actually like the more ruins-like areas that led into the battle against Glumshanks.
Oh yes, Evil Eyes Glumshanks. I really enjoyed his character and getting to explore it again further on. And there's so many great characters in the game from both sides of the like East and West Coast teams that it really was a pleasure to get to play with all of those toys, figuratively and literally.
It's one of those things with Avril. I think we only see her again in Imaginators briefly, I think, from what I can remember.
Yes.
Which kind of a shame. Wish we got to see her more.
Yeah, it's tough with such a large cast to pull him in, and she was so attached to that zone that it was harder to sort of pull her out because somebody correct me, but I don't think she comes with you like Sharkfin does, like to help out way. Like she's like, I gotta hang back here in the mountains, right? Like she doesn't go with you on the journey past Frostfest to be a recurring, but I did just really enjoy her a great deal. So I'm glad that she was missed.
So, speaking of a large cast of characters you got to play with, where did the idea to introduce Chaos's mom come from?
Oh man, Chaos's mom. I am going to express a small bit of regret because we tried to name her in the game, and I think they ended up naming her finally in the cartoon. But in the game, she is just called Chaos's mom. Like she doesn't get her own name, and I don't even remember what we were trying to name her. But I think we just decided that she would be Chaos's mom in the end. And we were trying to come up with somebody who would be scary for Chaos, but in a different way than like sort of the other sort of villains that he's interacted with in the past. And so like just this sort of evil stage mom came out of a meeting and I cannot remember whose idea it was, but she just became this amazing personality. And I think there's also it might be in his bio, it talks about his parents or at least his father.
In Spyro's Adventure, I don't remember exactly what it is, but I remember it's a story scroll.
Yeah, and like I remember this line, and I hope I'm not just inventing something, but like something about like kicking his dad in the Widdershins. Like that
Yes,
line has stayed with me for 10 years. Like I don't remember almost anything else. I'm like, yeah, he kicked his dad in the Widdershins. I'm like, where's that? I think that is the source of this idea of this whole estrangement from his parents and then doing this with his mom, that sort of thing became the story. And then so because that was the plan and we had enough time, that is kind of why they decided to add the stinger with the mom at the end of Giants. I believe that is the order of events. Willing to be corrected, but I think that's how it worked.
that's pretty cool. We actually did like a whole episode talking about the foils to Chaos, and one of the ones that I think works really well, and I wish we got to see more of her. Spoilers, she gets trapped in a mirror at the end of Swap Force, and we do get references to her with the Chaos Diaries and Superchargers. But the way that she interacts with Chaos is just so different compared to like really anyone else, to like Moneybone or to Glumshanks or to the Archean Conquertron. And it's great to see how like Chaos's childhood and his parents very clearly affected his balance of ego and try to rule over Skylands. I find it to
Right.
be very interesting. It adds so much like great nuance to this character that we otherwise didn't have beforehand. It's a glimpse into, well, how did he become this way?
So I loved the character. Christine Baranski's performance in the game was just spot on, like mom's supervillain from a Disney movie sort of achievement that she pulled off in there. So I was just really happy with her whole execution. I think from top to bottom, the team did a great job with both the character and, like you were saying, creating a different kind of foil for Chaos that pulled out a different side of his personality where you're like, I feel bad for him right now, beyond his side sometimes, which I think was very interesting as part of Chaos's development, where you began to see him as more than just a cartoon supervillain. Like he just had depth that we were able to dig into over the course of all of the games and all the stories that were told about him.
So, in that case, how would you describe Chaos as a character? How do you see him? Do you see him more as a villain or do you see him more as an anti hero?
Oh, so I do see him as a villain. The thing about Chaos is he is the bad guy, but he is never really as bad as he is trying to be. And the problem with Chaos is that he is a villain and he will backstab you and he will do all these things, but he cares about things and he doesn't like that he cares about things. And it gets in the way of things and he won't tell you that. But yeah, I don't think I would call him an anti hero. I think he is his own hero, but I do like that he just walks around calling himself evil all the time and doing those things. But I think there's just a line that he has as part of his personality that he just won't go over. But in order to get the things that he wants, he keeps like sort of partnering with people who want to take it further than he wishes to go. And so he has to continually like dial that back and fight with that urge to like prove himself and like conquer and do those things. But I think he's a villain at his heart and I really kind of just I respect that about him. And I think in Superchargers, you kind of discover that, like, yeah, he is a villain, but he is not as bad as some of them. And so you kind of like end up sort of siding with him sometimes because you're often confronted with something that is way more evil than Chaos, and you're just kind of used to him at some point too.
That actually makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, Chaos wants to rule Skylands. Like, he's going to do it his way, and he's going to find out his way to do it, and that's that. Even in Swap Force, right? Like, he hoodwinks his own mother and is like, no, I'm just going to do this. Have fun.
Yeah, and I think there is just that bit of, we never kind of get into like how old is Chaos? And it's sort of a mix of like, is he older with some like arrested development or is he childlike? It's never quite nailed down. And I think that mix is super interesting. In some of the comics, we got to dive into a lot of Chaos's relationship. And there's a whole story where like he has to work with Spyro for a big chunk of the story. And there's that whole like hero villain dynamic being played out where they have to achieve something together. And I really enjoyed working on that and sort of exploring more of like the depths of what he would do, but also being able to introduce other villains into the world.
Circling back around to Chaos's mom, who was it that came up with the idea of her going into the portal during her boss fight? How exactly did that come to be?
So we had like a boss fight team who designed the mechanics of those things. And I'm trying to remember who was on that team. I believe Denny was the lead boss designer at the time, or maybe Paulo was also working on it. I'm sorry, like it all sort of blurs into a team of lots of people working on the games. But I think it was probably the boss team that came up with the idea of her using portals and moving in and out of it. Did she say in there that she was also a portal master?
Yes.
Right. And so like her being able to manipulate the energies and do something that was sort of just it fit within the fiction of the world and it also made her something special that was unique to her and made her feel like dangerous and interesting and a threat. But I'm pretty sure that originated with the boss fight team. Like that boss fight team was just like stellar. The concepts and the ideas and the things they like the sort of fantasies they delivered on over the course of Swap Force was just incredible.
One of the things that I like about Skylanders a lot is the ability to do those fourth wall breaks because the player has an interesting role as being part of the canon
Right.
because the Skylanders got sent to Earth.
Yes, being able to involve the player in both Swap Force and even more so in Superchargers, I think was a great evolution of the stories and using that sort of conceit to lean into the story. And especially because if your audience is on the younger side, that's something that's a brand new experience to them, right? They've never played Metal Gear, like with where they're mind controlling the controller, like that fourth wall thing, like that's new to them in a game, but it's also what kids are used to, right? Like if you watch kid shows, they're used to talking to the television and the TV talking to them. And so that was also something that we remembered that like kids will embrace that fantasy of interacting with those characters at that level. And I think that was super cool that we were able to do that.
I mean, I think it's even fun as an adult. Like Trap Team Superchargers does it as well. I'm talking about Rift engines being able to punch back through to Skylands. It's all like really fun and part of world building. Like anything that does fourth wall breaks is just very cool. Like the Drowsy Chaperone, the musical.
Spider-Man the musical unintentionally.
The tall tales that are told by Snaggle's Scale, were those ever meant to act as like a parallel to Flynn and his stories?
I don't think intentionally. If they did, I think well, we needed two things. We needed to fill the space, like on the river. Like you could just do it with the gameplay, which would have been fine, but I also thought this would be like a really cool place to build on this character. So we created these like ridiculous stories that Snaggle Scale would tell. And they almost didn't make it into the game. We were recording with the actor and we got to the end of the session and we're like, I don't know if we're going to make these. And the actor was like, oh, we're going to get these in. Each one of those tall tales are a single take with no break. Like he read them, he did not miss a single word, and he did it in that breathless cadence, one after the other, like a hero. I have never seen anything like it since. And so, because of that, we got to have Snaggle Scales, Tall Tales in the game. And people still remember that and talk about him working out his latissimus dorsi muscles to do the bug-eyed cobra and like flex on people because he won so many. And the scoreboard didn't go past 99.
That's legendary, the fact that it was all one take for each.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Unmatched.
So, what was the process like of coming up with Tessa, and what prompted giving her a different, more fangirl like relationship with Flynn, at least at first, as compared to the more brash relationship Flynn has with Callie?
So Tessa was a great evolution of a character. So we needed a sort of an envoy from this world, act as us. to help escort us through this world and introduce it. And since we had created this idea of them being isolated, the idea would be that Tessa has grown up on these legends or these ideas of Skylanders and them being these incredible things. And so where Callie was sort of more efficient and maybe a tiny bit cynical, Tessa was completely, while being super competent, she was just very just earnest is the word. Like she's just like wears her heart on her sleeve and she's just excited about stuff all the time. And I feel an endearing way. Like I love Tessa as a character. And even when we were choosing her voice, like we had auditions where they were sort of delivering what you would expect from sort of a traditional like superhero female voice character, like you would hear like in a cartoon series. And there's a lot of great performances there. But when we heard Ari's take on the character, and it just had that sort of earnest, excited energy, she just sort of really just captured who that character was in my mind. And then the idea of her sort of having that relationship with Flynn is if you play the first two games, Flynn kind of just hits on Callie like all the time. And like that's their relationship, right? Like he hits on her and she's like, leave me alone. And so the concept really was just to sort of flip that and make Flynn uncomfortable for the third game, where he was sort of getting a taste of his own medicine. I don't know if he ever learned the lesson, but actually just sort of put that back on him so he could see what that feels like a little bit.
Yes, like having to deal with the flying feather mattress.
Right. And that too. And it put him in a place where we were able to just like mine it for humor over and over again. Right? Because now Flynn is the established character, and in this space, he's the fish out of water, and everything is weird. And in this world, he's the one getting hit on, and people fly on animals. He doesn't have a ship, and all those other sorts of things. And so, like, I think Flynn sort of fumbling through the Cloudbreak Islands, there was a lot of moments that we were able to just get some cool moments and humor out of, which I really enjoyed.
So speaking of pulling Flynn's strings, what was it like coming up with Mesmeralda as a character and the musical boss fight?
So we talked at the beginning. I'm a musical theater major, and I love shows. I love musicals, and obviously love like cartoon musicals and that sort of thing. And so the idea was that we were going to have a musical number in the game, and surprisingly, everybody was on board. Like everyone's like, "Yeah, let's have a musical number in the game," but we wanted to stage it like you would kind of see in an animated movie sort of introduction of the villain. And so Mesmeralda was a collaboration between myself and the concept team and making like the boss, like vaudeville Nora Desmondy like sort of character. And when I went to go write the song, I don't remember if they had the puppets as part of the boss fight or if that came from the other direction. It's hard to remember, but that's where the idea for the song came from. Was the title came first, like okay, it was going to be called Pull Your Strings. And so then we just got to sit down and I wrote out like the lyrics for the song, and the song really sort of ties in a lot of, if you like read the lyrics, there's a lot of just like theater references from start to finish, and how she refers to herself and the show, and like roping you into the show, and then the characters, and then the cinematics team really embraced this as well. We did a lot of research on other musical numbers to that effect. There's a long version of the song that's not in the game, like that's on the soundtrack. It was just such a great experience, sort of from start to finish, to sort of create that moment, create that character, and have that musical number. To see people like on YouTube singing the song that you wrote and have the song like translated into multiple languages. So I delivered the lyrics to Matt, who was like one of our audio engineers, and then he wrote the music to the lyrics, and we wanted this sort of big sweeping Phantom of the Opera undertones to this big, like you wanted to have that big sustain where she holds that high note and everything. I like the number of people who contributed to that and like performed, and the Broadway actress who did the actual singing voice for her, and Greg Lyle playing the perfect villainous voice for her. Like it was amazing. And getting to finally utilize my degree at that level in a video game was and is still a career high, that I got to write a song that was performed by a Broadway singer in a video game is a achievement that will never get old for me. So hopefully you all enjoyed it too.
Yes. Typically, whenever I have like my music playlist up for like musical soundtracks, that song, like as it's auto playing, pops up, and I find that quite funny. My suggestions know me too well. I do just love Mesmeralda as a character. I think she's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I truly wish we got to see a bit more of her.
Yeah, me too.
Plus, voiced by Azula. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
That is.
And Daphne.
Yes.
So, what is your reaction to finding out that Rufus is widely regarded as one of the worst characters in the entire franchise?
What? Impossible. So Rufus, I feel, gets a bad rap. Well, for two reasons. One of the main reasons Rufus gets a bad rap is because he gets overutilized and he wears out his welcome because he is in charge of like all the post game content. And so every time you want to go do something, you have to go talk to him. And then he's just like sort of talking about game content and he's not participating in the story anymore. He's just this sort of wall that's in your way between fun. And nobody wants to be that person. But inside the game, he actually, I believe, serves a very important purpose within the space because he is the person who is acting as sort of that liaison between the worlds. And he is also this amazing foil for Flynn. Like he is just another person that he bumps into that has to be so straight laced so that Flynn can bounce off of him and pretty much just make fun of him the entire time and point out that he's like this uptight butler dude. So I get why some people would find him annoying. I loved his character design and his voice actor did a great job. But the other thing is when you make so many characters, and I feel like both sides of the teams have made so many great and memorable characters, not all of them are gonna be hits. And we were still kind of learning sort of the universe and what will work and what not work. And not everybody is gonna be Tessa or Sharpfin or Mags. Some people just get benched. You're like, okay, well, you served your purpose, you did your thing. But I feel sorry for Rufus that he's one of the worst, and I'm sorry that not all of my kids are loved, but that's okay. Like he served nobly, and he put up with Flynn, and he got us through the Cloudbreak Islands and helped navigate us through the world. So even if he's not liked, he is appreciated by me. So, but I really like that you guys were like, I'm putting this question in here.
Yeah, we're not scared to ask the tough questions. Now you are making me feel a little sorry for Rufus.
Oh, good. I mean,
Just a little bit.
a little bit. It's okay. It's all right though.
We'll get it trending on X, I guess now. Justice for Rufus.
Hashtag justice for Rufus. That's what we'll post with this episode and just see what happens.
So I guess moving on, do you recall any plot points that you wanted to include, but they were ultimately left on the cutting room floor? Or were you able to repurpose any of those ideas later on?
I don't remember any specific ones that I was like, oh, this was going to be in the game and we had to cut it. There was so many ideas in the game, and I think we wanted to show more the whole water area is populated by people who look kind of like Oberon. Yeah, we wanted to kind of show more ties to some of the Skylander characters, like showing like more members of their race felt like a cool way to explore. And I think we wanted to do more with that we didn't get to do. We did some of it in the comics, like showing more relations and personalities and things like that. But we didn't make them feel like they were the same character, like they were decidedly different. Like when you met the tree people who were firefighters, were very different from some Smash, right? Like they were obviously related or like kind of like the same race, but they weren't the same kind of character. So yeah, that was one of the things we maybe wanted to do. I've been thinking about this one since I received the questions. I just couldn't come up with anything specific that we really wanted to do that we didn't get to do. I think we got to do quite a bit.
No, I mean, I think that's really cool insight, though, because, like, thinking back about that, yeah, that's actually one of the things that I like a lot about Swap Force is that we do get these, like, ties to different characters. Like, we have the Illuminator with Whirlwind, and we get some backstory on that. Like, that was a very fun way to be able to integrate these different species into the world, but not have them be the Skylanders themselves. It felt very D&D like, and adding in all these like races and world building, which is fantastic. So I guess kind of going off of that then, what was some of your favorite stuff that did get worked into the game?
Whiskers was incredibly hard to animate, and he almost got cut multiple times because I don't know if you know this, but a boat very easy to animate compared to this giant feather mattress that people are riding on that has a face and emotes and things like that. And so it was super challenging to sort of get the right time and budget and everything. And the animation team, led by Adam Olshan, did such an amazing job with the bird, making Whiskers just a character in his own right and not just sort of a different vehicle. He participated, he got evilized, that sort of thing. And I think getting to introduce and add to the world with characters that do resonate with people, even like 10 years later, has been amazing. And obviously, the musical number is probably still going to be the number one beat. But I will say this about working on Skylanders that is probably the most important, and that Skylanders literally changed my life and my career. And I will be forever grateful for the opportunity that I was given to work on this game and to write something that reached so many people sort of in their formative years and that allowed me to like kind of continue on this path of like narrative exploration and storytelling in games and to be able to build that out in the comics. Like I can't imagine a world where I would have been able to do so much and have so much of an impact on a world and an IP in any other circumstance. And so when I was growing up, I loved stories and comic books and that sort of thing, but I'm like a kid from South Chicago and video games weren't even a job in my sense. And so to be that kid who now gets to do that stuff. And when I was working on the games, my kid was the exact age that you want a kid to be for Skylanders. So he got to grow up with those stories that I was telling and play Skylanders and share that with his friends. And so I don't know that I'll ever properly be able to communicate how much that means to me and the fact that all of you amazing people want to talk about Skylanders 10 years later. Like it's just amazing. So I don't know if that is my favorite part or just that people still ask me what my favorite part is. It's my favorite part. So I appreciate all of you. So thank you.
I mean, thank you for like giving us all these amazing stories. Skylanders came out while I was in high school, but it definitely impacted me a lot. It really encouraged and helped solidify that I wanted to go into the entertainment industry in some sort. So for me, it really kind of helped inspire me and lead me in that direction.
It's great to hear. Thank you.
I guess kind of going off of, I guess, the legacy of Skylanders, what was an average day like working on the franchise at Vicarious Visions?
I don't know if we had an average day, but there's so many aspects to a Skylanders game, and the Vicarious team was very invested in the project. We had people making toy designs, we had people designing characters and boss fights and all these things. And so, as on Skylanders Swap Force, I was both the narrative lead and the systems lead. So I was doing both things, and so I was helping build all of the system design for the game while also doing the narrative design. And so I was working on any given day with concept team, with the boss fight team, with the character team, because the character team wanted background on the world and what part are they taking place, and going to VO sessions and writing sessions with the writing team from Activision, and then reviewing those with Toys for Bob and making sure we don't have conflicts. And so there was really no typical day. It was just a large series of events that we would keep going through with traveling back and forth to California. And it was, not to be punny, a whirlwind that I don't remember every part of it. We went to Toy Fair. We got to see the Skylanders there. They had a Swap Force party in front of the Toys R Us at Times Square where there was like celebrity guests, and I'm hanging out there and playing Skylanders with them, and then going to New York Comic Con to demo the game that same weekend and seeing giant washbuckler Mega Block made out of Mega Blocks and taking pictures with him. And so It's all still, it both is very real and surreal to me, but I don't know that there was ever a typical day other than I knew I would spend a lot of my day having to sort of communicate my vision for both the story and the systems and how they play together, and work with multiple teams to sort of execute on that vision so that it felt holistic and like a complete story, and it didn't feel disjointed between gameplay and the storytelling and that sort of thing. So mostly a typical day was a lot of talking and sharing information, both within the team at Vicarious and with the teams on the West Coast.
It really just sounds like a really cool working environment of just a different thing every day, and it's continuous,
Yeah.
not like a typical 9 to 5 desk job kind of thing.
It was not, but I will not lie that there were some days where I was like, what would it be like to leave at 5 and not think about work? And I know I would not enjoy it for a long time, but sometimes having this stuff live in your head when you go home and when you wake up is challenging. Holding any part of a vision and then communicating that vision over and over again and answering questions about it. It can wear on you over time, but obviously even after this many years, I wouldn't change it or pick anything differently.
So, what was your favorite part of working on the Skylanders development team?
It was getting to see the kids and their families be so excited about the world and the games. It was the first time I had been part of something with that kind of reach. And I didn't quite understand it all the way until after Swap Force came out. And then seeing our trailer on the NASDAQ building, right? I saw a video of that and I was like, this is pure insanity. I'm like standing in the street recording this giant commercial for a thing that I helped shape. And being able to be part of that is both amazing and overwhelming and humbling all at the same time. And so my favorite part of working on this game is also I got to work on it with people who respected that sort of responsibility that we had and were so devoted to making the best possible Skylander game that we could. Like they put everything into this game. I'm still friends with a lot of them. I was given a lot of trust and I was given a lot of, opportunity to create with these teams. And like I said, it changed the trajectory of my career and I'll always be grateful for that.
I mean, not only was Skylanders huge because it was a big, like, multi-billion-dollar video game series, but also just the way that it allowed people to connect between like families or friends, being able to take Skylanders over to people's houses, all this kind of interconnectivity that like it created. That period of Ways to Life era, if you will, in video gaming, it really spawned this excitement about just being able to connect with people, going to stores and like, oh, you're also looking for Skylanders, or oh, you're trying to like buy a Skylander for someone and you don't know what it is. There's all these different like ways that allowed people to connect in different ways that it's just, I think, a really special franchise because of that.
Thank you. I think so too.
Do you happen to have any advice for aspiring writers?
So I'll try to keep it general and not specifically to video game writers, but I will kind of frame it in the sense of becoming a professional working writer rather than a person who is writing like their great epic novel that is really for them, sort of like portrait author person, because I've never really been that kind of writer. I've almost always been sort of a for hire author who has worked at a company or a studio or that sort of thing. Like I wrote plays, but I've never like shopped plays or tried to sell plays. Like those were plays that I was directing. And so what I would say for aspiring writers is the number one thing you need to be if you want to do this professionally is to develop the ability to write in so many environments. Like most of the Skylanders writing, I wrote in a team room full of people talking at a desk. And so to be able to show up every day and write in that environment and be able to deliver and sort of be able to adapt and ignore the idea like writer's block is a thing, but to be able to find techniques and other ways to push past it and sort of require yourself to write is one of the big skills. At some point, you're not allowed to not turn in scripts, right? Scripts have to be turned in, cinematics have to be made, voices have to be recorded, so you have to be able to deliver. Is one of those skills. A few other tips for aspiring writers is dialogue is very difficult to write. And it's very difficult to write dialogue that sounds natural or believable. And one of the first things you should do when you're writing dialogue is you need to read it out loud or have other people read it out loud in front of you. And if the idea of you giving your dialogue to somebody to read out loud in front of you instantly makes you tense up, then absolutely you need to do it because that is how you'll learn to develop an ear for dialogue so that you can be like, oh, I get it. I can hear it as I'm typing it so that it will now sound natural when we're coming out and being able to adapt it. So that one I give to all writers who are having to write dialogue is to make sure that somebody is reading it out loud to you. It is easy to write dialogue that you're going to want to write to explain what is going on, which we kind of touched on before. And what I would like writers to try to focus on is to try to first find the emotion behind that line, like understand why that line is being said. And if the only reason that line is being said is because, well, I need the audience to know this thing, that's not a good enough reason to write that line. If that is true, then you need to find another way to deliver it that is sort of tied into an emotional interest or stake that that character has so that the player stays engaged with what is going on in the story. And then the other thing I would say to do is to consume content outside of the field that you are trying to work in. So if you're trying to write for video games, I would encourage you to consume content that is not video games so that you are not just sort of regurgitating video game story content that you have consumed, like being able to bring in aspects from your personal experience and from all over allows it to feel like a more rich world, and it means that you have a voice that is unique.
The idea of having to like push past a writer's block is probably the hardest part because it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, if you're just doing like creative writing for fun, then it's like quite easy to just be like, oh, I'll sit on this and come back to it in a few years.
Right.
But like if it's your job, then you're going to have to sit there and figure out some way to move past it. And that makes a lot of sense.
And there's a lot of techniques. Like for me, I'll change locations, I'll go work on something else, but then let it ruminate in your head. Being able to deliver on a schedule is one of the biggest challenges that junior writers have because that's not usually how, like in school you kind of have to turn things in on time, right? You have to do your short stories, but the stakes didn't feel the same to me in school as they did when I got to the job, right? Because there wasn't a team of people like, you got that script ready? Because every day you're late, the dependencies build up, and that is pressure that you don't want to inflict on yourself. So the other thing I would encourage writers to do is to be comfortable with showing your first draft to your team. Like, don't hold on to it until you think it's perfect because it still won't be perfect. You have to show it to your team as soon as you have a readable draft, start working on it with them, and then just revise, 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 revise. And then you'll kind of get into that habit and you won't even remember you had writer's block once. I get writer's block on my other stuff, by the way. Like I'm not immune to it. Like I've sat on comic stories for years sometimes because I couldn't find the way through it. But that's a different skill set and a different condition.
And you're working on a new comic series as well, right? Are you able to hint about
I
that,
am.
talk about that?
I'd be happy to talk about it. It is my first new comic in probably 6 or 7 years. It's also my first creator-owned, not all ages book in a long time too. So it is a new comic series called Battle Mex, MEX, which is set in sort of a alternate universe where Mexico was not sort of conquered or colonized. Essentially, it's like it's an Aztec Super Sentai, so like our Mexican Power Rangers. If you want to like sort of simplify it down to its basic essence. And so it's a story my brother and I came up with 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And it's really just sort of me taking all of the things that shaped me as I was growing up. So back then there weren't Power Rangers yet, but we had Gotcha Man, Battle of the Planets, we had Voltron, we had Robotech, and we had Spectre Man, and all of these, and Ultraman, and it's sort of taking those kinds of stories and lensing it through like my culture, my family's culture in this version of Mexico, and I'm just trying to have like a really having fun with it while also telling a story that I think will be entertaining and enjoyable and, mild social commentary within it. But it's really more about the sort of recapturing those stories that I grew up with, but making it heroes that look like more like my kid, right? Or more like this family because growing up, he loved all the superheroes. But when he discovered Miles Morales was Hispanic and was like biracial, just like him, that changed him. Like he saw himself in his heroes in a way that he never had before. And I'm like, if I can do that for him and other kids, wouldn't that be awesome? Like kind of create the characters that I didn't get to have when I was growing up. And so that's kind of why I'm doing this new comic series.
Like I have a friend who's like really into Power Ranger stuff, so I'll have to let her know about this. I think she'd be very into it.
The pre-launch is on Kickstarter now, so you can follow the page and get updates. And thank you for asking about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And also hearing you talk about diversity is super important.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, David. It's been a really interesting and insightful conversation with you.
It has been my pleasure. I really love the deep dive on some of these questions and the fearlessness. And I just really appreciate all of you sort of keeping Skylanders alive and in your hearts. It's awesome.
We all really appreciate you and the work you put into this franchise, the work and the love.
Hashtag justice for Rufus.
Yes.
Hashtag justice for Rufus. Just doing his job.
So as David departs the academy on Whisker's back, we turn to our good friend Hugo, who comes to us with his trusty handbook, ready to share another Skylander with us.
Hugo eagerly starts flipping through the pages of his handbook, and bubbles start pouring out as one of the pages catches on fire. Hugo quickly flips to that page in order to put it out, and from the pages of the handbook leaps the Skylander Wash Zone. Wash Zone is a combination water-fire Skylander that is created by combining the top and bottom halves of the two characters that come in the starter packs, Washbuckler and Blast Zone.
And that's pretty fitting considering it's the 10th anniversary of Swap Force. Watch Zone is part Murma Squid and part
Ernest Knight.
And the top path has a bubble gun and also a cutlass. So not only do you have the long range, you also have the short range. But then the bottom path has a bunch of cool rocket abilities that allow for speed, but also fire attacks as well.
As far as swappable Skylanders go, what are your thoughts on Wash Zone, Trioxen?
It's always tough with swappable Skylanders in general because you're taking characters that are designed to be very cohesive, have a theme, and then mashing them together to get some zany combinations. And honestly, this one is pretty weird too, because you get so used to seeing Washbuckler as this octopus pirate and Blast Zone as a furnace knight, I suppose. And then suddenly you remove probably one of the key identifying factors of Washbuckler and giving him regular pants, 2 legs and pants, metal pants, I guess. So appearance-wise, he's not my favorite combination. However, the gameplay of this guy feels very nuts because he's very fast with his attacks as Washbuckler, and now you add extra speed to him on the bottom half with Blast Zone's capabilities. Add to that with Blast Zone's upgrades, you could go for his fiery aura to do damage as he's moving around. He can zip in, zip out, causing damage to nearby enemies while also hacking and slashing with Wash's cutlass, I suppose.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting combination because I do like Buckler as a character a lot. And being able to like have the bottom half that allows for a little bit more mobility, it kind of feels more like a dodge roll as opposed to like just pure speed in one direction, which I find interesting. But like when it comes to Watch Zone, it is kind of a little bit different in that playstyle is very kind of, instead of like having to dodge as you would with Washbuckler, you're now able to like kind of like go in and get those attacks into an enemy and then get back out before that enemy starts doing whatever attack pattern they have. So in some ways, I think I like the playstyle of Washbuckler on its own better, but also the abilities that you have to have more combinations for gameplay with Wash Zone, I think does give him a bit of an advantage, even if it doesn't look as connected or look as cool.
For me, from my perspective, the artistic design of Wash Zone definitely feels a lot less coherent, as it is already swapped, but it still retains a semblance of cool. And when it comes to like play style wise, I feel like they took the better half of both characters. Because when you look at the reverse and you look at, say, Blast Buckler, you end up having a lobber who is slightly slower to get around, as opposed to a fast-paced, ranged character with melee capabilities that, as Inklander said, can just get in, get the job done, and get out. It's kind of combining the best of each character to make the best Skylander it possibly can from them, which I feel was kind of the very essence of the Swap Force to begin with. With all that being said, on a scale of 1 to 7, Trioxen, what would you rate Wash Zone as a whole?
Personally, I would rate Wash Zone a 5. As much fun as he is to play as, the combination isn't my first choice when I hop on Swap Force.
It's a very
Yeah.
fair, very solid number. What about you, Inklander? What would you rank Wash Zone?
I would have to agree with Trioxen and say that it's going to be a 5 out of 7 for me too. He is fine. I like the character. I think generally fun to play as, but definitely not the first choice that I would load into the portal for a swap combination.
For me, Wash Zone ranks a solid 4 out of 7. Well, I really like the playstyle behind him. It's a lot of fun, and as I said, it is the best of both Skylanders. The almost uninspired design really takes a lot away from it for me. And that's honestly the case with a lot of the Swap Force when they are swapped. But looking at the two characters separately as well, I was never a fan of Blast Zone's design to begin with. Washbuckler's design I think is fine, but like the whole Furnace Knight design, I feel like we did it already with Igniter. And there are other similar cases where it's like, I feel like this particular design has already been done too many times. So it just doesn't feel very inspired to me and kind of takes away from well, it adds gameplay wise to Washbuckler's abilities. It takes away from Washbuckler's actually really good design. So I would rank Wash Zone at a solid 4 out of 7, which brings our Hugo's Handbook total score to a 4.7 out of 7. As Hugo goes to chime in with his 2 cents, the Academy kind of quakes. It sounds like, if I know this feeling as well as I think I do, Flynn's just crashed the Dread Yacht into the Academy. So we need to head over and make sure everything's okay.
We rush over to the crashed dread yacht to see Captain Flynn just beside himself, bawling his eyes out. The dread yacht is in ruins, unflyable. We consider our options and we decide the best course of action is to tow the dread yacht with superchargers all the way to the Tower of Time. That way, we can turn back time and prevent the crash to begin with. So the Tower of Time is a Skylanders Swap Force expansion level that features everything that a platforming gamer loves. There's plenty of jumps, obstacles, timed puzzles, a whole plethora in a very long level. The mission of this level is for the Skylanders to stop Cluck, a villainous bird, who has designated the Tower of Time as his new home. However, this causes a whole bunch of time hijinks, leading to the freezing of time as well as the traveling back in time, such as the case where Flynn ends up having a duplicate of himself, where obviously he becomes fast friends. So to stop Cluck, you have to enter the Tower of Time, but 3 gears are missing to access the Tower of Time. So the Skylander has to explore through the level to reach a bird nest where each gear is held. Once all the gears have been collected, Skylander can access to the inside of the Tower of Time, hop on an elevator, fight some more minions, eventually reaching the boss of the level, Cluck himself in a mechanical suit. Once the player defeats Cluck, all the timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly shenanigans are put to rest, and Skylanders and Flynn can return home. So Ditto, what did you think of the Tower of Time?
Tower of Time is a long level, even by Swap Force standards. It does a lot of things really, really well, but you do really start to feel the length of it. There is a whole lot of platforms and bridges and fans and windmills, things like that, that all come into play here. And the theming around this level is flawless, and it makes for a really, really fun design and a fun adventure. All the way down to the iconic boss character. I am glad that this was an expansion and not part of the main game, as when I'm doing speedruns, I don't have to deal with it. Most Swap Force levels, once again, end up being shorter. So it just feels like one of those levels where it would just drag on. But overall, I'd say this level is very enjoyable.
So for me, I like the theming and I like the plot. I think it's kind of funny that we have 2 Flynns. And it also introduces us to Cluck, who is a great villain, who we also get back later in Superchargers in an even better level. But generally, the idea of like, okay, this tower is broken, you need to collect gears, like help put things back and defeat Cluck. I think that's a really great concept. And even that said, like the whole like sepia look of it and like the freezing of the level and being able to use that to fight enemies and everything, that part I think is very cool. But as someone who isn't like a super huge fan of platformers, this part has a lot of like things where you're having to do multiple steps in order to be able to do more platforming. And because of that, I feel like it kind of slows things down, I guess, fun because it's stopping time, but it just feels like it's slowing things down a bit by adding in more steps to do things that you otherwise wouldn't have to do in a regular Skylanders level. And so because of that, while I think the mechanic of freezing time is actually pretty cool, I'm not actually a super huge fan of how it gets implemented. I do think it's neat how many different ideas they're able to add, like having a crate that you have to push around and stop from being pushed by fans, and having platforms that can like drop from under you. That's pretty cool, but it's just not for me.
What about those time spell punks and clock gear golems?
Oh yeah, and the addition of like random like enemies that like theme or act like elementally themed but aren't is a weird choice. It
Right?
almost feels like Vicarious Visions is trying to be like, oh, the clock element. And it's just nope, that just didn't happen.
Weren't they the ones who also wanted to go banana and shell element?
That's true. They did.
We could have had a whole new cavalcade of elements. Think of all the possibilities.
I'm kind of glad that they didn't.
Yeah, it's not Pokemon.
It could have been just a role filled by any of the other kind of golems and spell punks that we've experienced already.
Or the ones that we haven't, because we didn't get all 10 elements of Gear Golem and Spellpunk.
Don't forget about Vortex Gear Golems.
Okay, so technically the element rules of golems is just out the window. We could just make anything. I am upset there was not a banana golem, though.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Finding out, because I don't have much experience with this level, finding out that this is where Cluck was first introduced into the franchise was kind of a oh wow moment. Because all I knew him before was from Superchargers, and he's a great villain there. So seeing that he actually had a history already in the games And this is coming from someone who has read the wiki regularly and I guess just hasn't bothered to click over to the Tower of Time section.
I also didn't experience this until after Superchargers. So I had that same kind of shock value.
Inklander, did you play Tower of Time before encountering Cluck and Superchargers?
I did.
So I have to ask, was there any kind of like, oh hey, it's Cluck again?
It was like one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, it's that like one-off like villain that's back. It was kind of jarring because like going from like time travel level to, oh hey, here's this commentary on factory farming was a bit of like a switch, and I was like, this doesn't like, okay, I guess from like he's mechanical and he's kind of going and doing more mechanized things. But that was like the only through line I could see. It felt very like shoehorned in when I got to like Superchargers, or it's like, yeah, okay, sure, we'll just go with it. That's fine.
It feels very much like the Lex Luthor villain arc of I'm starting off as a mad scientist messing with, things I shouldn't be, to I'm just going to become a capitalist.
Basically, yes.
It's a perfect villain arc. So after an unseemly amount of time trying to restore the Dread Yacht back to its former glory using time travel and coming up fruitless, we finally decide, hey, there's a free hot air balloon over here. Why don't we just take that for now? We'll figure out the problem later. Flynn, a little dejected, but kind of happy to return to his former days as a balloonist, takes us back to the arena.
Sailing slowly through the clouds, as one does in a hot air balloon, we just smile and wave at the inhabitants of Skylands as we fly overhead. As we turn to wave hello to Brock flying over the arena, something suddenly seems very wrong. The balloon just isn't here anymore. It seems we have traveled too far away from the Tower of Time, and the hot air balloon we had borrowed has returned to its own time as a result, leaving us to fall into the arena, where we land hard, interrupting a conversation between Brock and Chaos's mom. Chaos's mom is, like her son, a dark portal master, who has a very Maleficent-esque design to her. We first catch glimpse of her in a photo inside of Chaos's castle in Skylanders Giants, and then she makes a proper appearance in Skylanders Swap Force, where she has had Tessa kidnapped, and we have to face her down. Trioxen, what are your thoughts on the character of Chaos's mom?
I want to start off with the continuity error for good reasons, but of how she's depicted in Skylanders Giants versus Swap Force. Quite a different look, but we understand why. But overall, Chaos's mom, I think, is just a really cool villain. She's got swagger, she's got style, and she's backed it all up with a lot of power and feels more menacing than Chaos, despite Chaos himself having a lot of that power. Because as David brought up, evoking the days of Metal Gear Solid or those games that required you to leave the screen and do something outside or change your physical environment to then continue a fight, continue gameplay is just, I live for that. I eat that stuff up, and it's just so much fun in this. So yeah, she's got to be one of my favorite villains of the entire franchise, hands down.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I love the way that she interacts with Chaos, how she brings out a different side of Chaos and more personality and more stuff like that, as we were talking about David as well. She's just really an interesting character that I think gives a lot of insight into Chaos as a character. And because of that, she's just absolutely amazing. And the only real complaint that I have about her is I wish we got to see more of her.
I tend to find myself enjoying the Academy version of her more than I do what little we get of her in this game. But that's probably because it's just more of her. I found her to be a really enjoyable villain overall.
And the Academy version is kind of interesting because she is good pretending to be bad, but even then, like, she still feels very similar between that and like the game version. She still has this kind of like overbearing mother kind of like attitude, which I think is a lot of fun. And that's the like core essence of her personality, and that's why I think it works so well. It doesn't matter whether she's actually evil or whether she's like good pretending to be evil, like in the show. Like that energy is kind of carried through, and just like that kind of snarky attitude makes her character really, really fun. She can feel pretty dangerous and pretty powerful too, which is just a great thing to have for a character like this.
And speaking of Skylanders Academy, I do want to touch on her relationship with Glumshanks in that show. I haven't watched the whole series yet, but every time her and Glumshanks behind Chaos's back are just enjoying themselves and having just besties time, it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, there's also that one episode where like Glumshanks gets convinced that he's Chaos's dad. That's even funnier.
That all being said, Trioxen, on a scale of 1 to 7, how would you rank Cassandra or Chaos's mom?
Can it be anything other than a 7? No, it has to be 7. I'd give her an 8 if I could.
Yeah, same for me. It's an easy 7 out of 7, considering the only complaint is a wish we saw more of her character. And that's saying that, like, yeah, sure, we only get like an offhand mention of her in Superchargers and Imaginators, and we get a decent amount in Swap Force, but then we have her in like tons of episodes in Academy, and I'm still like, oh, we need more of her. I think that goes to show that 7 out of 7 character.
I 100% agree, and I myself think that Trioxen's right. What can it be other than a 7? It's exactly as Inklander put it. We got an entire series featuring her throughout 3 whole seasons, and yet we still feel like we didn't get enough of her. If that doesn't scream a perfect 7 out of 7, what does?
Now I really want to have a spin-off show of just Glumshanks and Chaos's mom.
That would be incredible. More than satisfied that we gave her a perfect score, Cassandra opts not to blast us with dark magic, as Brock picks all 3 of us up by our collars and just pitches us into the arena.
As we all land with a thud in the center of the arena, we all have the idea of pretty much what's going on here. So we stand up, dust ourselves off, and we each assume our respective positions in the arena. Because you guessed it, this is the Archean Arena. Inklander, as our special returning guest this episode, would you like to present your Skylander first?
Sure. So as I stand in front of my Swap Force portal, the colors of it change until it turns green. And out pops Thornhorn Camo, Series 2 Camo from Skylanders Swap Force. So Thornhorn Camo is a life element Skylander with ranged attacks, with a maximum health at level 20 of 900, critical hit 54, armor 29, speed 45, and luck of 26. Camo's primary attack is Sunburn, which deals 30 damage and is basically shooting beams of light. Thornhorn Camo's secondary attack is Firecracker Vines, which deal 20 damage, and that is spreading out vines that basically explode near enemies. And his tertiary attack is Melon Fountain, which deals 90 damage, which creates a barrier of melons around him that can be shot out as a force field in many ways. His 2 different paths are Vine Virtuoso and Melon Master. The Vine Virtuoso upgrades the Firecracker Vine ability, typically allowing for more vines and bigger explosions. And the Melon Master path upgrades the Melon Fountain ability, dealing more damage and adding in more melons to the attack.
Camo really is a fierce one.
It's going to be a real thorny foe. All right, Ditto, what did you bring to the table?
I step forward, extending my hand over my portal as it emanates a soft green glow. The words "rooting out evil" echo through the arena as my Skylander is summoned forth, and out steps Boom Bloom.
Of the life element battle class.
Yes, of the life element battle class. Boom Bloom is a life element melee Skylander with a maximum health at level 20 of 960, critical hit of 91, armor 48, speed 68, and luck of 33. Her attack 1, Whip Whap, is an attack where she swings her whip, comboing up to 4 times, dealing 96 points of damage with each successful hit. Her attack 2 is Vine Entwine, which sends vines out that pull enemies in after a short while, dealing 23 points of damage. And these vines, if you hold the attack, can extend even further. And this attack also deals 48 points of residual damage as enemies are being drawn in. Her attack 3 is Spore Seeds, which grows spore seeds that damage enemies for a total of 27 points and 13 points residually after that. Her top path is called Spore Seed Specialist, and it allows her spore seeds to gain a wider area of effect, as well as gaining the ability to shoot seeking spikes and explode on their way out. Her bottom path is called Grow Green, and it increases the range and the damage of her Vine Entwine attack, which also gains the ability to pull and explode her spore seeds. And for a soul gem, she has Pedal to the Metal, which allows for Whip Whap to be charged up, revving up a vine wheel that explodes into 4 spore seeds.
Here comes the boom, eh? Well, I think I missed the memo seeing these 2 life Skylanders in front of me, because as I reach my hand over my portal, instead of the nice, beautiful green glow, everything goes dark and there's a chill in the air. When all of a sudden, out of the portal comes one giant paw made of bone, followed by another. And what it looks like is going to be some ginormous creature rising from the portal. A little happy-go-lucky bone dog comes out looking for attention. That's right, I summoned Funny Bone. So Funny Bone is an undead Skylander with a mixed battle class. Funny Bone's health maxes out at 690, critical hit 56, armor 31, speed 45, and luck 25. Funny Bone's attack 1 is the Flying Bone Disc, which does 35 damage, which, as it's self-described, it is a flying bone disc. Funny Bone just literally flings a frisbee at its enemies. Funny Bone's second attack is the Bone Saw, which does 10 points of damage, and essentially Funny Bone forms a full-on saw around itself and scoots across the field. Attack 3 is Bone Paws, which deals 101 damage, where Funny Bone summons ginormous bone paws from the ground, which attack enemies. Now for the paths, Funny Bone's top path is Tail Wagger. Tail Wagger improves upon the Bone Saw attack, allowing Funny Bone to supercharge the Bone Saw. Anytime they dash towards a Bone Paw, it also supercharges the Bone Saw. And while pressing and holding attack 3, Funny Bone is able to summon a ghostly skull to devour enemies during the Bone Saw attack. Now for the bottom path, called Bone Zoner, where Flying Bone Discs can now explode and do additional damage. Funny Bone can perform a Flying Bone Disc Slam, which will affect a larger area, and a fun little pinball attack, being that if Funny Bone is to launch a disc at any of the Bone Paws will pass the disc back and forth, creating a sort of area of effect damage zone.
I don't think anyone can have a bone to pick with that description.
So Inklander, how would you go about handling this fight?
With Funny Bone, I'm not that concerned. A lot of his attacks are weaker than mine, so because of that, the biggest thing that I think I'd be most concerned about is the long range of the disc throw. So considering that, most likely what I would be doing there is, because I have the firecracker vines, I'd be able to try to deal with a long distance with more long distance. So that's primarily what I'd be going with there. Meanwhile, Boom Bloom, I'm a little bit more concerned with Boom Bloom's primary attack. And so in those cases, I might actually be trying to dodge a little bit more and hide in the melon. So I'm going to go with the melon master path here. And so I'm only going to get 1 firecracker vine, but I'm going to be able to deal more damage with that 90 damage attack that's only going to increase by choosing that path, and really try to focus in on just like spamming my tertiary attack best I can with camo, especially if anyone tries to come too close.
Sounds like a solid strategy to me. Well, to be perfectly honest, Boom Bloom isn't really worried about either of the other Skylanders on the field because that 4-hit Whip Whap combo goes off so quickly that it's going to be very difficult to get out of. And in one combo, she has demolished half of your Skylander's HP. So all it takes is 2 combos really to do the job, especially since I'm going to open with, I think I would aim for Camo first and just bottom pathing. I would use a Vine and Twine to pull Camo out of the melons and closer to me within range of my whips, which deals enough damage plus residual damage that 2 combos the moment Camo gets close and Camo's done. And then I would pretty much treat Funny Bone the same way. I feel like that would give Funny Bone time to put up those bone paw setups and get a frisbee going if on that path. But once again, less concerned about that because 2 very quick combos and it's over.
Yeah, that's the thing, is Boom Bloom is a sensei, which just means that she's going to have way too much attack power. So definitely one of the things I'm most worried about is that primary dealing that 96 damage, and considering the combo there can deal significant amount as well. Yeah, my primary thing that I'm going to be trying to do is just fight back against that best I can with the melon path and just hope that I can whittle some of your health down.
Right. And then seeing as how I'm on the bottom path, as the Vine and Twine pulls in, it explodes into those pollen seeds that also explode for damage as well. So it's kind of like explosive AoE radiating damage. Well, my whip is just tearing it up. There's not really any other way to play Boom Bloom, in my opinion. It's like you could go the top path, but it's like, do you want to play worse? That's really the question there.
So I really think the only way that we might actually win this is if Thornhorn, Camo, and Funnybone teamed up.
Correct. In which case, I would focus on Camo first still, because Camo does have the potential to output more damage more quickly than Funnybone does.
Yeah, so the primary thing that I'm going to try to do in that case is use the Firecracker Vines to keep you at as much distance as I can. By the time that doesn't work, just keep spamming the tertiary attack until Camo goes down. Hopefully that deals enough damage and acts as enough of a shield in order to protect Funnybone to try to get in a couple more disc throws.
My first thought definitely was I would like to form an alliance with Inklander.
I saw this coming miles off the minute I started looking at a sensei.
Yeah. So my take with Funnybone is I'm definitely going for the Bone Zoner path, and I want to try and create an area of effect with the bones and throw discs within that to create a sort of a pinball ping pong effect to at least make it incredibly difficult for Boom Bloom, which Camo will unfortunately have to deal with that as well. Meanwhile, while Funnybone has discs flying around and the bone paws are passing them around, I'm going to use the bone saw to try and chip away some damage through, trying to speed my way through, chip away, and just try and keep repeating that while dodging as much as possible. And if in a pinch, I can always hang out underneath one of my paws to heal me with my Soul Gem ability. I mean, it might not be enough of a counteract against Boom Blue's vicious damage and her combos, but it might be able to help me get a little bit of an extra edge or even like a couple extra attacks in.
It'll definitely buy you a couple of seconds. I had totally forgotten about the Soul Gem, so I wouldn't have accounted for that in my initial strategy. However, once Camo's down, if I see that healing going off, Vine and Twine to pull you out of it and right into the whip.
We would really have to team up.
It would have to be a very solid like team up opportunity, and I could see the two of them meshing well enough for it to happen.
Yeah, it's just us as Portal Masters have to coordinate.
Right.
So if anything, I think it is entirely possible that combining your ping-ponging attack with the melons might actually be able to defeat Boom Bloom as long as we are able to coordinate that well. But I think probably I'd say most of the time Boom Bloom is going to win this.
Considering my strat of taking out Camo first, I would say probably 9 times out of 10 that Boom Bloom goes down, Funnybone wins it.
The heat of this battle is almost unlike any of the other ones we've had before. It's more chaotic, it's more vicious. The Skylanders are fighting with some ferocity we hadn't seen before. Boom Bloom's vines are tearing through the concrete walls of the Colosseum. The audience cheering initially, is now turning into screams and panic as they run out. Ginormous bone paws rip out and start slashing away at weight-bearing pillars. Camo's vines not only adding to Boom Blooms, but also the exploding fruit, the noise of them covering the panic of the audience. Dust flies in the air. It's hard to see anything that's going on. We portal casters take shelter away from the Archean arena and wait for this moment to pass. But as the dust settles, rubbles and vines and skeleton remains all that there is, one figure stands on top of the pile. Boom Bloom.
And with that, it seems like it might take Brock a little while to repair it.
I would like to state that no Mabu were hurt in the making of this battle.
Everyone managed to escape, although some of them did get covered in watermelon on their way out.
And that concludes Season 3 of Portal Casters. I want to thank everybody for listening and enjoying this adventure with us. I'm sad to say that this is my final episode, but it's been a blast, and I cannot leave you in any better hands than Inklanders.
Oh, well, thank you, Trioxen. I appreciate it. It's been great listening to all the episodes that you and Ditto did over the past season, and it's definitely sad to see you go, but I'm really looking forward to rejoining the Portalcasters full-time as a co-host for the next season, which will begin airing next year. And not only that, but I am very excited to be able to announce that we are producing not just Season 4, but by the time you're even hearing this episode, we'll have recorded stuff for Seasons 5, 6, and 7. So we have tons more stuff planned in the future, so stay tuned. And we will see you all next year.
Looking forward to it.
Take it away, Chill Bill.
That concludes this episode of Skylanders Portal Casters. You'll find the website and links to the hosts' individual channels in the description, including their wonderful guests. Follow the Skylanders Portal Casters Twitter for regular updates about this podcast. And join Discord server for Skylanders discussion. Until next time, this is Chill Bill with K-Troll signing off.
I just love the concept of like, hey, you crashed your ship. You know, it's the easiest solution, time travel.
It's wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
We don't question how time travel works. It just works.
And so hopefully it can fix the Dread Yacht.
If the plot demands it, it will.
It's not somebody called Sharpfin. It's we're gonna time travel.
We'll just say Sharpfin's charging too much these days.